Welcome to Rewitched, a charmed 1998 rewatch podcast. Join us on our journey as we recap, examine, and critique the series episode by episode from the beginning.
We'll be keeping our podcast spoiler free, so we welcome fans, new and old, to join us in watching and reflecting on one of our favorite shows. Currently, we're on season 1,
I'm your host, Jess Sabanko.
and I'm your host, Mia Savenko.
Now let's get into this week's episode. This week, we're discussing Season 1, Episode 13, From Fear to Eternity. It originally aired on February 10th, 1999, and had 6.67 million viewers.
Okay, so we start out this episode in a magic shop, and Prue and Phoebe are shopping together, and they see this red-haired woman behind the counter who tells them she's getting ready to close. Prue's confused because she thought that the store was open later, but the lady says that she wants to close early tonight, especially on the eve of Friday the 13th, and she actually wants to be closed by midnight. Phoebe says she's looking for a good luck charm, and Prue's like, what's the worst that can happen if you pick the wrong one? Because it's still a good luck charm. The woman asks if she wants to put it on Piper's order, because I guess Piper had gotten a big order, but she says no, she'll pay separately. The good luck charm is for a job interview, we find out. The girl tells them that if they sign up for this mailing list, they can get 10% off, so Phoebe puts both their names down. And then the woman looks at them and says, if you're interested, we're having Wicca gathering this spring equinox. And Prue and Phoebe get really confused, and they're like, what would make you think we're interested? Woman says most witches are, and they're really confused as to how she knows that they're witches. Then the clock strikes 12, and the lady's freaking out and rushes them to leave. And she says that they should take this Friday the 13th thing seriously, especially the one this year, because once every 1300 years there's a universal convergence of negative energy on Friday the 13th, and this is the year. Neither of them are very convinced, but then the clock strikes 13, and the woman's concerned, and they say goodnight and they leave. So as Prue and Phoebe are driving off, we see smoke come out of the grate, and then this gray-haired man appeared who like spreads his arms and like sniffs the air like he just like evolves, like I don't even. Then he walks up to the door where Tangela's store is, and as Tangela's finishing closing up, and he knocks on the door, and she tries to kick him out and say, sorry, we're closed, but then he just walks right through the door. Tangela freaks out and puts up this amulet, but he says that those don't work on him, and he swipes his hand across her face to kind of read something, and he read her biggest fear, and he says, your greatest fear is being buried alive in an earthquake. And then all of a sudden the room starts shaking, and she can't move because she's frozen in fear. And then she dies, but not being buried. She dies from like getting too scared, like a heart attack. So she falls to the ground, and we see that her hair turns completely white and her eyes are wide open. He walks over to her list on the counter of people, and he steals the names of all the people who were witches on it.
Yeah. Which I actually think was a really cool power, the way like he somehow was able to read like which ones were witches and everyone else's name just stayed on the list.
I'm like confused as to what his powers are, because he's also like, we see other powers throughout the episode, but I'm like, oh, so it's not just like fears.
Yeah, like it's clear that he has some way of like sensing who witches are.
Yeah.
And I guess that's how kind of the list thing worked.
Right.
But it's like it's interesting.
But it's cool, yeah. I like the way he did that.
I also will say this is probably so far my favorite demon of season 1. Maybe one of my tops of the series. We'll see as we keep watching. I've always liked the demon of fear,
Yeah.
but
Me too.
we'll see if I grow to like any other demons more. So from there, we move to the theme song, and then we are at the manor the next morning. Piper walks into like one of the downstairs rooms. I don't know what it's called. I said the foyer, but whatever. It doesn't really matter. She has this shoebox in her hands and it's full of all these little like charms and trinkets. Then all of a sudden, we're over by the kitchen and her and Phoebe are walking out together. Phoebe's dressed up for her interview and they're arguing about whether she has ever said something to them. Phoebe says, whenever I say it to her, she says something like, oh, me too, or same here. And Piper's like, oh, you know what? You're right. And then Phoebe says, yeah, the girl cannot say the words, I love you. Then Prue enters the room. So we get the idea that they were talking about Prue. She tells, Phoebe that the outfit she gave her looks great on her. They're kind of having a little bit of sister banter. And then they all sit down at the table together. Prue tells them that she had a wonderful dream about mom. She says that she was a little kid, 4 or 5, and their mom was holding her hand and taking her somewhere. She felt really safe and protected in that moment. Phoebe says that she wishes that she dreamed about their mom. And Piper makes a joke and is like, Mom would have to knock before she came into your dreams. Again, all these jokes about Phoebe. Prue yawns and like Piper covers her mouth for her. It's like a superstitious thing. She says that she's going to let the devil in if she yawns. Then we see that Piper has all those charms again, and she says she needs them for this superstition themed fundraiser that's happening at Quake. It becomes clear that like Piper believes in all these superstitions and like the bad luck of Friday the 13th. She even says that she met Jeremy on Friday the 13th and he tried to kill her. Prue doesn't believe in superstition at all, whereas Phoebe says that she focuses on good fortune and doesn't really focus on bad luck. She says that the interview she has is with a real estate agency and Piper's going to drive her there. So Phoebe says to Prue as they're leaving, have a great day, Prue. I love you. And Prue says, yeah, me too. And both Piper and Phoebe kind of look back at her because they just confirmed what they were talking about before. As they open the door to leave, Andy is standing there. And they kind of like have a quick greeting with him and they're like, oh, we are running late, gotta go, whatever. And then Phoebe's like, Prue, there's a policeman here to see you. So Prue comes into the room and she's kind of like, oh, this must be bad news. Like it's a little early for a social call. And Andy is like, you're right. We've had 3 suspicious deaths since midnight, all single females, all under 30. Then he brings up Tangela, the bookstore owner, and is asking some questions because according to the credit card receipts, Prue was the last customer in the store. Prue says that, her and Phoebe were the only ones there and that the bookstore owner was locking up as they were leaving. He asks her if the place was in order when she left and she's kind of like, yeah, like why? And then he brings up how the place was a wreck when they found her, but it wasn't the injuries from like the debris and stuff that killed her. She had a heart attack. He tells her about, the white hair and how her face was contorted in terror. And that's also what happened to the other victims. He said, if I didn't know any better, I'd say they were literally scared to death. Then he, kind of comes back to Prue and is like, do you usually go to occult stores at midnight? And she tells him, that Phoebe needed this good luck charm for an interview. Of course, that's not her normal behavior. And then he says, that all the victims had ties to the occult and that Prue should be careful. Then we cut up to the attic where Prue is looking at the Book of Shadows and she finds a note in their mom's handwriting about the demon of fear who appears once every 1,300 years.
So pretty long scene. Did you have anything to say about the whole I love you thing from Prue?
Yeah, so that was really interesting to me.
Yeah.
It's actually something, so little bit of a personal story, but a certain love interest of mine, you know who I'm talking about. We were actually in a fight and he had said to me, I love you. And because I didn't want to say I love you back because I was mad at him, I was like, me too.
No. Oh my god, I love that. Yeah, I think that I've heard her say I love you though.
Have you? I feel like I need to look back.
I can never like remember. Every time it happens, I forget about this episode, and then it comes up, and I'm like, wait, did she? I should have paid attention in the other episodes.
Yeah, we know these writers aren't huge on continuity, so there's a good chance that she has literally said I love you to them before. But any listeners who, have paid attention to that, let us
Feel
know.
free to
Like
let us
send
know.
in
Yeah.
a DM and like tell us, has it happened before?
Like, didn't she say I love you to Andy
Um,
more earlier on?
I don't know. I remember him saying I love you to her, but I can't remember
Oh,
if she said it back or not.
wow. Yeah, I guess you're right.
Because like even in that like breakup scene where they're like outside of his house before he mysteriously moved to the apartment building,
Yeah.
um, he's like, Prue, I love you, but I can't remember if she said I love you too or not.
I don't think she did.
I don't think so either.
Wow, so maybe they actually were pretty, you know, on point with this one.
Yeah.
It's not typical for them.
Speaking of Prue and Andy, I like that we're again, like we've been saying the last couple of episodes, we're really solidifying that he's making those connections between the sisters and like occult occurrences, which I'm kind of wondering how that storyline is going to keep building. Like, when is Andy going to find out they're witches? I
I
have a feeling it's
know.
coming, and I just when.
I mean, at this point, I think that's like, I think he feels like that's the case, but he doesn't want to admit it, kind of thing. I mean, even here, he's saying, all the victims had ties to the occult, so be careful, kind of thing. Like he almost saw it coming. So I can't wait to see how that happens too. I really hope Andy finds out soon.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we just see this note in Mom's handwriting about the demon of fear. And we know how sensitive Prue, all of them, but it seems like Prue especially I've noticed, is like very sensitive to things when it comes to Mom, but like doesn't want to admit it. I feel like she was never able to let out her emotions about that. And she is the only one who was old enough to actually remember Mom. So
I think she also had more of an understanding of like kind of what death was and what it meant. Like
yeah,
I feel like her mom's death was a very different experience for her than it was for Piper and Phoebe, who were much, much younger.
yeah. No, I agree. Okay, so now we move over to Quake and we see Piper, who's just kind of there working, setting stuff up, and Prue walks in, and there's this cute guy at another table in a red sweater, and he's just kind of standing there talking. Prue asks who he is, and Piper says that's Lucas Devane. He's chairing the fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. And apparently he's one of the Bay Area's most eligible bachelors. And Prue wants her to go talk to him because he's looking over at her. And Piper says that she doesn't want to talk to him because of the superstition that any relationship started on Friday the 13th is doomed. But, Prue says that he's still looking at her and thinks that she should. They start walking together, and Prue kind of almost leads them under a ladder, and Piper moves them around. Just another superstition. She's just being very cautious when it comes to all of those right now. And then Prue starts telling Piper about the demon of fear note that she found in Mom's handwriting. And they're both kind of talking about how it's the only thing they've ever seen written by Mom in the Book of Shadows. And then Prue's like, well, she must have known that this demon would appear in our lifetime, and she wanted to warn us against them. So apparently the demon of fear needs to kill 13 unmarried witches by midnight, and then he'll be free to kind of walk on Earth and wreak havoc every day. And Prue says that she doesn't know how to kill him, but does know that he kills by turning their greatest fear against them. And their mom wrote in the Book of Shadows, in the face of our greatest fear, our powers are paralyzed. And that they need to release their fear in order to overcome this demon. So then they start talking about how Piper's afraid of flying and Phoebe's afraid of elevators, so they both should, obviously avoid those things. And then Piper's like, and then you'll stay away from water or pools, Prue. Ever since Mom drowned, you've been terrified of the water. But Prue kind of dismisses this and is like, I'll be all right. And then she gets up. She isn't going to go to work. She decides that she should go based off the list that Tangela gave her, or the flyer that Tangela gave her, and try to go warn other witches. So she's going to see this girl named Zoe, whose name is on the flyer. And then Piper, of course, tries to say, I love you. And we see Prue not say it back again. She just says, yep, and leaves.
So a couple things on the scene. I think it's just like so wild that like, I don't know if this is true, but according to the show, like magazines used to publish who the most eligible bachelor in your area is. Like, what the fuck?
I feel like that's super weird.
Also, I love that this guy is literally just the most like cookie cutter, basic white guy I've
Yeah.
ever seen in my life. And they're like, oh, most eligible bachelor in town. It's like literally season 1 of The Bachelor type of guy.
Yeah. He is very basic. I mean, he's a cute guy.
He's cute. No, I'm not saying he's unattractive. I'm just like, it's so funny that, of course, that's who they picked to
Yeah.
be like the most
The
eligible
most
bachelor.
eligible bachelor. But he's into Piper, which is understandable.
Yeah, I would be too. And, as far as, their fears, the demon of fear thing, this is just setting up a lot of the plot for the storyline.
Right.
Again, continuing that Prue can't say I love you trope that we established in the last scene.
Mhm.
So then from there, we cut to a real estate office where Phoebe is sitting down and she's in an interview with this blonde woman. Phoebe is kind of laying it on thick. She's saying, she's excited for the chance to work with a successful woman. If I want to be a success, who better to learn from, right? And the woman is totally eating that up. She's like, oh, I love that answer. And, as Phoebe's doing this, she has the good luck and charm in her hand and she's kind of playing with it, touching it. The woman hires her and asks her if she could start that same day. Phoebe says yes. That's when this like man enters and we find out that the blonde woman is going to go off somewhere with him. And she's asking Phoebe to kind of like stay and handle the phones and everything. And then she kind of ends that conversation with, if my husband calls, I'll need you to cover for me. And like Phoebe seems really uncomfortable with this, but it's like, yeah, okay, like I'll do it.
Yeah, like pressured into that.
Yeah.
Doesn't really know how to go about that situation. I really like that Phoebe isn't like happy or okay with this. Like, I feel like a lot of people would just be like, whatever, it's not my concern. But I love that Phoebe has morals and she just, at least it sucks, but obviously she's not happy about this. So I guess we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and it kind of brings me back to that episode 1 plot line where like, Roger had accused Phoebe of like trying something with him, even though he was Prue's fiance.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this just tells me that like something like that would be so against Phoebe's morals.
Yeah.
Because like, if she wouldn't lie for a stranger, she definitely wouldn't betray her sister.
Exactly.
Like that. So it's like very clear that like, this is something that Phoebe is like very set on. And like, honestly, being against cheating is a good moral to have.
No, definitely.
So, like,
definitely. I mean, it would definitely make me uncomfortable. I don't know what I would do in a situation like that, because you're like, well, I need a job, but like, oh God.
Yeah, like if this was my literal dream job, right? And like my boss was like, yeah, if my husband calls, like you
maybe
need to
I'd
lie
just
for
try
me,
to
like,
avoid it.
I wouldn't know what to do. And I think that's what Phoebe does at first, right? And we'll see what happens when the situation comes up. But I think Phoebe's kind of thinking the same thing. She's like, oh, well, hopefully he'll just never call.
Yeah, like, hopefully I'll just never have to worry about it. Also, the whole interview thing, Phoebe's just milking it, and this blonde woman is eating it. I mean, I guess that's how it normally would go, but I probably wouldn't act that like, oh my God, look at you, so successful. Like, how else am I gonna learn?
I feel like interviews are so
Like,
awkward.
so
like, I
fake.
never know what to say. I'm always
Yeah.
just like, yeah, like these are my experiences. Like,
I know, like,
this is why I'm qualified for this job.
You have my resume. Most of my interviews that I've been on have been less of us talking about, my work and everything, and more of them just kind of getting to know me.
Yeah.
And asking me questions about my life, school, everything. Except for one where they pretty much focused on like, work and everything. And I was like, oh, this must be what a real interview is like or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, I work in higher education. That's not a secret. And most of the interviews I've done at like different colleges and things, they ask a lot of questions, about my previous teaching experience. They kind of ask about my classroom philosophy, things like that, which obviously makes sense for those types of interviews, how I deal with different types of situations. So it is like that, but I'm not sitting there like kissing their ass, kind of like Phoebe was trying to do here. You know
situation examples or situations questions make me so like nervous.
My favorite was when I would interview for like, jobs. Like one time I interviewed to work at European Wax Center and they were like, what's the hardest situation you ever had with a customer? I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
what kind of question is
at
this?
a wax center. Like, what do you think is gonna happen here? They'll give you like a really specific scenario and then be like, how would you go about it? And you're like, how would you go about that? Like, it doesn't,
Yeah, like,
when
aren't
is
I
that
working
ever-
for you?
yeah, when
Like,
is
what
that-
am I supposed to do in that situation?
when is that ever going to happen, you know?
The best is, have you ever had to fill out like one of those surveys for a job online where it'd be like, you see your coworker stealing, what do you do? And there's like multiple choice answers.
Yes. And you're like, okay, like, let me just pick the most obvious one.
Yeah, because like, what's the real answer? I'm not gonna snitch on somebody. So
Yeah.
like, what do you think?
Like, I'm not really gonna. Maybe we're screwing ourselves over for future job interviews with this podcast. But so now we are at this apartment complex and we see this woman in her apartment and she's kind of trimming a tree. She's got incense burning. She's got like a whole kind of setup. It's pretty obvious she's a witch. And then the demon of fear appears behind her and she pretty much expects him to be there. And she says, I thought you might come. There's nothing for you here. And the demon says, oh, you could not be more wrong, witch. You're all alone. That's all I need. And she says, pretty confidently, you have no power over me. I've evolved to a place where I've released all mortal fears. And then he kind of makes a face and wipes his hand, swipes his hand over her face. And then we see that her candle flames that are lit behind her start getting higher and then go to the ground and start surrounding her in a big fire. And he says, you didn't release your fear of fire, you only repressed it. And then flames start growing around her, and at this point she is freaking out, and he's like so happy that this is going on, just eating this up. And then he says, save it for another lifetime, you're frozen in fear. And she's screaming and dying. And then outside the door, Prue starts knocking and hears her scream in there. So she uses her power to open the door. But by the time Prue gets in there, it's too late. Flames are gone, the demon is gone, and there's just a circle of ash around her instead of fire. She's dead and her hair is white like the other one.
Yep. So I really liked this witch. I really liked her confidence. Obviously, she didn't actually release her fears, but I really like this idea that she knew that the demon of fear was coming this year the same way Tangela did. And so what she worked on was trying to release all of her fear so that he wouldn't have any power over her.
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool idea. Unfortunately, she failed at that.
I know. But I mean, it can't be that easy to just get rid of your fears,
I have so many irrational fears.
Me too.
And it's so hard.
Like I feel like once you get rid of one really bad fear, like then wouldn't second place just take first place? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't. I feel like that'd be really difficult. But I mean, the fact that she worked on it and was confident about this and tried to kind of be able to defend herself in this moment, or at least keep herself alive, like good for her. Too bad it didn't work.
Yeah, and I think this is only the second time in the series that we're meeting like other witches, and it sucks that they're all just dying as we're meeting them.
Dying as we go along. So we are at the apartment again, but obviously some time has passed, and CSU is there, police are there, and Darryl, of course, is kneeling by the body.
Welcome back, Darryl. It's been 2 episodes.
We missed you. Then Andy walks up in some really dirty Converse, and Darryl gives him a dirty look and kind of starts making fun of them a little bit. And then he starts filling him in on what happened and says, her heart just gave out, just like the others. Andy basically says that those are his lucky shoes, and Darryl obviously thinks they're very embarrassing. And then Darryl steps away to talk to a cop, and Andy looks at the body. Darryl comes back after talking to the man, and he says the doorman keeps a log of visitors. Want to guess who the last one to see the victim was? And of course, it was Prue. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
She's always involved.
There are 2 people who are always involved in crimes in San Francisco. One is Andy and the other is Prue.
Yeah. Every single time.
But yeah, no, I again, we've been talking about it most of the season. The Andy and Darryl banter is amazing. I love their chemistry together. I love their interactions.
This whole him wearing his lucky Converse thing, I mean, that was never mentioned before. So I'm thinking he must be wearing it as like a superstitious Friday the 13th thing as well.
Yeah.
Which is like more of a reason that's like, okay, Andy obviously has some type of belief over these things, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also funny because like I love seeing, because I think that naturally we're like attracted to people who are familiar to us.
Yeah.
And so kind of the way like Piper's really superstitious, right? And like Prue obviously has a good connection with her sister.
Yeah.
And then Andy kind of has that same thing. So maybe it's something like familiar to her that kind of drew them together. You know what I mean?
Maybe. I guess I hadn't thought about that.
But yeah, so from there we move to Quake and we see Prue, Piper, and Phoebe sitting at a table. And she kind of says that, she's telling them about the dead woman Zoe. And she says that she just called 911 and then she left. She didn't want Andy to know that she was there. She says that she can't get her face out of her mind the way she looked so fearful. And Phoebe's kind of like, well, what do we do about the other witches? And Prue says that she stole Zoe's day planner and she's going to make some phone calls, hope that some of them are witches and she can warn them about what's coming. Prue knocks over some salt on the table and Piper's like, oh my God, like you need to throw it over your shoulder. And Prue's like, that's so stupid. No. And then Piper's like, well, my feeling is you can never be too rich or too safe. And that's when Phoebe notices like this little ladybug flies onto this plant on the table. And Phoebe says, Grams once told me whatever direction a ladybug flies in, you can find your ideal mate. So she kind of like flicks the leaf and the ladybug flies away from them and lands on Lucas's shirt. And Prue and Piper are kind of like exchanging these looks. And Phoebe's like, what's going on? So Prue tells her that, he's been trying to talk to Piper all day and she's been avoiding him. And just then a waiter bumps into Prue and spills like water all over her. Piper says, see, you should have thrown that salt. And, Prue's like, well, I need to go home and change. So she gets up to leave. And Phoebe's like, be careful. I love you. And Prue's like, yeah, and leaves. And Phoebe and Piper sit back down at the table. Piper's like, all right, so she can't say it. Maybe she's afraid it'll make her look too vulnerable. Ever since mom died, she had to be the strong one to take care of us. It's probably just all part of that. Phoebe's kind of like, yeah, okay. And she tells Piper that she needs to go back to work. She tells her that the job is great, except that her new boss wants her to lie to her husband about her affair. And Piper's kind of like, well, what are you going to do? And Phoebe isn't sure. Piper wishes her good luck. Phoebe leaves. That's when Lucas walks over to Piper's table and asks her if she wants to get dinner after the fundraiser. At first, she's kind of like, oh, like, I don't know, whatever. And then eventually she's like, the ladybug lands on him again. So she's like, okay, you know what? Let's do it. Yeah.
Took it as a sign.
I feel like that's me. I'm always looking for signs about things. You
Oh,
me.
yeah,
I be
you
telling
are
you too.
always looking for
like,
signs.
This is a sign.
I'm more of a, whatever happens, happens kind of person. Like, try not to think too hard about things. I feel like Piper is being a bit over the top with these. And I remember earlier in the episode, Phoebe, I think, or Prue, one of them had said that, the reason all these bad things keep happening on Friday the 13th is because people put energy into believing that they will. And it seems like Piper's kind of doing that to herself by like convincing herself that if she makes one wrong move, superstition wise, that everything's going to start falling apart for her. But really, it's probably would usually just be like any other normal day, you know? Okay, so now we go back to the real estate office, Phoebe's job, and she is sitting at the desk and she's flipping her little good luck charm coin. And she says, heads, I tell them the truth, tails, it's a lie. And of course, it lands standing up right in between the two. She's
physically
like,
impossible,
yeah.
Unhinged.
She's like, well, that was really helpful. And then all of a sudden the phone rings, and as she's going to pick up the phone, she knocks over a bottle of water and touches the water and gets a premonition of Prue drowning in the shower. And she kind of hangs up the phone and, starts freaking out and rushing back to the manor. So first she tries to call Prue after she hangs up the phone, because obviously she doesn't want Prue to drown, but Prue doesn't pick up. And as the phone is ringing at the manor, we see Phoebe on the voice machine, or we hear her on the voice machine, and the demon of fear is there, and he kind of swipes over the phone like he's stealing some information from that too with Phoebe's voicemail. And then we see him walking upstairs, and we see Phoebe hang up and start leaving to go to the house because Prue didn't answer.
So I think it's a little bit of a reach that she touches a water bottle and gets
I
that
know.
premonition, but we'll let it slide for now.
Yeah, it was pretty. And the fact that, the heads or tails thing, it landed on its side, like, all right, when has that ever happened? I remember watching this here, I was really confused as to what he was doing with his, like, the voice machine. And, obviously I didn't realize till later, like, oh, that's why he did that. Like,
Yeah.
I never understood it.
Yeah, I mean, it's because, it had the caller ID, so he could get the information about her job and go find her there, or like call there later.
Oh, I was thinking because he needed her voice.
No, that doesn't make sense.
What do you mean? Like, he had her voice. Now
Oh,
how
so
else
he
would he
could
have known what she
repeat
sounded
her?
like? Yeah.
But he doesn't use her voice until way later. Like when they're physically already together.
Yeah. I mean, I figured, I know it was to get the SWA properties information, but I guess I just thought,
I guess.
how did he?
Because, like, think about it. He uses a random voice when he calls Phoebe, and then he uses Phoebe's voice way later when he already has her with him.
All right. Well, then I'm just being an idiot. Forget what I said.
Sorry, I feel like I, like, insulted you.
My
My
bad.
bad.
All right.
So then we're at the manor. We're inside the bathroom. Prue is kind of in the shower. Her eyes are closed. The demon of fear is standing there and just, like, watching her. Ew. She opens her eyes and, like, she sees him standing there, and she, like, backs herself against the wall. And, he does his little swipe thing, and he's like, your greatest fear is drowning. Thank you for making this so easy. And it's one of those, like, standing showers, if you didn't watch the episode, that has, like, the glass doors around it. And all of a sudden, water starts filling from the bottom, and she's freaking out. So I guess because the charmed ones are more powerful, she's not frozen in place like the other ones were. So she's, turning off the water, she's moving around. She tries to use her powers on him, but those are what's frozen by her fear. She can't use her magic. So she starts panicking, and she's drowning as the water starts filling up higher and higher. Outside of the manor, we see Andy and Darryl are approaching the house. And, Andy's kind of saying, I'm sure there's a logical explanation why Prue was involved with this. And Daryl's like, you mean this time or every other time? So they ring the doorbell, and just as the doorbell rings, Prue screams, and they both run into the house. We're back up in the bathroom, and the demon of fear disappears. The water drains from the shower, and Prue's just standing there, like, terrified. They both have their guns drawn because, they assume someone's there with her, and that's why she screamed. And as they see it's just her, they kind of put their guns back, and Andy asks her if she's okay. And she says that she doesn't know. Daryl's immediately uncomfortable, Prue's naked. Andy's like just chilling.
I mean,
normal to
nothing
him.
he hasn't seen before.
And Daryl's kind of like trying to get Andy to leave the room with him. And then he's kind of like, like, come on. And Andy says like one more thing to Prue, and then he's like, I'll wait for you downstairs so she can like get dressed and stuff. So he leaves and closes the door. She grabs her towel, gets out of the shower, and there's still a little bit of water at the bottom, which kind of like comes out onto the floor. And she still looks very like freaked out by the whole experience.
So obviously, I wonder what was going through their head when they went upstairs and saw that Prue was just by herself in the shower, like what could have happened if this woman is all alone in her house. But she's like obviously terrified. Like she looked really scared in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that, they both kind of were like, okay, well, she's naked in the shower. Let's give her a minute,
Yeah.
I love the little comments that Darryl always throws in there, like saying, why is she involved in this every time? Yeah.
And I think I'm going to say that by the end of this episode, because of everything that Andy is doing for Prue, I think I'm very close to forgiving Andy by the end of this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's definitely, you can tell that he really cares, and he's showing that now, making up for everything he did before.
Yeah.
Still without an apology.
I think it's a little crazy that, like he reacted so strongly out of anger, and it does make me worry about that part of his personality too. But I think we're seeing in these last few episodes that the good in him is definitely outweighing that bad.
Yeah.
Not to say that, like abusive people who abuse their power should be forgiven because they have good parts to their personality.
Right.
But I think we are seeing like kind of that fade away
Mm-hmm.
and this kind of like understanding and desire to learn more about what is actually going on here, kind of overcoming that side.
Before it was more of like frustration because he couldn't figure it out and couldn't get it out of her. You can see now that he's a lot more like, okay, she doesn't want to tell me. I have to understand that. I have to respect that,
Yeah.
Okay, so now we are downstairs in the manor. Andy, Darryl, and Prue are in the living room after she just got out of the shower and she's still, in her shower towel over her head and robe. And then Andy says, so what were you screaming about? And Prue says, I told you I had soap in my eyes. Like, okay. And they ask why she was at the apartment, and she tells them that she was there because Zoe collected occult items and she was interested in selling them to the auction house. And then they ask when she got there if Zoe was alive or dead, and Prue said that she was dead. Andy gets like really angry that she didn't leave her name, kind of. He's like, why didn't you leave your name? And she was like, well, because I wanted to avoid this, and that she didn't want them suspecting her of being involved because she's not. And then Andy's like, well, if you were in my shoes, what would you think? And Prue makes a little joke and says, first of all, nobody should be in those shoes. But if I were, I would never think you had anything to do with this. And even there, Darryl's like, told you. And Andy just kind of is really concerned about her. And then she's like, and explaining all the weirdness that's going on with what Prue's saying. And she says, I told you I had soap in my eyes. And Andy's like, that wasn't pain on your face, that was fear. And then that's when Phoebe bursts through the door and sees Andy and Darryl in the living room and says hi and like asks if everything is okay. And then they're both like, yeah. And Darryl says that they're done. So they both leave. And then Prue is like, Phoebe, you would not believe what happened to me. But Phoebe tells her about how she saw it. And then as Prue takes her hair out of this towel, we see that there's a white streak in it. And she looks in the mirror. They're both kind of scared and concerned.
So I really like the way that Darryl and Andy are interacting with Prue in this scene. It feels a lot more professional than in some previous interviews we've seen with the three of them. And I like that they are now operating out of this place of concern as opposed to this place of anger, right? He's worried about Prue, which I feel like is how he should have been from the first time something like this was going on.
Yeah, like we saw in the other one, he was pretty less concerned about her safety and more trying to like accuse her of something, even though there was, here we see a lot more reason for him to be able to accuse her than we did in the other episode where someone tried to kill her and he was trying to accuse her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't make any sense to me, and it was obviously all out of anger, which I do appreciate that he's more consistently being supportive and like helpful, but also like, you should never do something like that out of anger in the first place. Like you shouldn't pick and choose when to be logical. That's what I think. But
and we all know I've been very anti-Andy like all these episodes.
Yeah.
But I will say one thing. I kind of, now that someone was keeping secrets from me, a little bit understand where Andy was coming from in those moments, because like sometimes when you feel like someone's lying to you again and again and again and again, you just like have to know that truth, and like this like thing kind of builds up in you. And I think that's where he was at.
Yeah.
So while I don't like the way that he abused his power, I do understand kind of where that anger and that like need to know kind of boiled over.
Right. No, yeah, you're right. I understand that too. I think in that sense, I'd probably be pretty determined to find out the truth as well. And it almost was like he didn't want to, do those things to her that he did, abuse his power, arrest her, whatever. But it was like, he was like, this is my last straw. Like, this is the only other way I can think of to get her to just finally be honest with me.
Like, I feel like I wish he would have done something more like what a normal person would do in a relationship where they think someone's hiding secrets, like go through her journal, like, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like something like that to find out what's going on, as opposed to like, let me arrest her for stealing a feather. Let me like degrade her in front of other people. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But here we see the concern for him.
Yeah. So we go up to the attic, and Phoebe and Prue walk in together. Phoebe wants to take another look at the Book of Shadows to see if they missed something. As they're walking in, Prue kind of comments how she's smelling the sandalwood smell and that it reminds her of a fragrance that their mom used to wear. Phoebe's over at the book and she's on the page about the demon of fear. And she says, "Wait, I thought you said there was nothing about releasing your fear." And that's when Prue kind of walks over to take a look. And we see that there's this new line added below. And it says, "To let go of your fear, trust in the greatest of all powers." And Prue's like, "That wasn't there this morning." And they start talking about what the greatest of all powers might be. Phoebe's like, "Well, is it the power of three?" But they're not sure. And Prue says that she can feel like their mom's presence around them. And Phoebe's kind of like, yeah, a lot of weird stuff happened to you today. Maybe you should like go to work because I think the demon only attacks when you're alone. So if you're around other people, you should be safe." And Prue kind of agrees to that. And Phoebe's like, "I love you." And Prue's like, "Me too." And Phoebe kind of finally comments on it. She's like, "Why do you do that? You never say I love you to me." And Prue's kind of like, "I just did." And Phoebe's like, "No, you said me too. And you never say it to Piper either. Have you ever said I love you to anybody?" And we kind of see like this look on Prue's face that she's like kind of thinking and considering it. And then she says, "Yeah, I said it to Mom. It was the last thing I said to her before she died." And that's kind of this moment of understanding for Phoebe where Phoebe kind of hugs her and, we get why Prue does that.
Yeah. I feel like we are seeing a lot of little hints of their mom thrown throughout the episode, and I wonder if that's gonna, play into later. But I kind of like the way they're just kind of slowly including more and more about their mother, like the whole "I love you" thing from the beginning of the episode, and now we know why, and it's because of that. Prue has this dream about their mom and, can smell her, see her presence. The lines, like, this is something that a passage she wrote in the Book of Shadows. So I feel like, the way they had that play into the episode is really cute and like subtle.
And the way that, Prue's greatest fear is also like connected to their mom and her death.
Connected to the way that her mom did die, And I guess, it is pretty understandable, it being, since it was the last thing she had said to their mom. And now Phoebe finally understands where that is coming from, that she doesn't say it. And I feel like understands that, if you're not ready to say something like that, then no one's going to make you do that.
Mm-hmm.
So then we find out how they need to get rid of him is trust in the greatest of all powers, but obviously they don't, and we still don't know what that is. So now we move over to Quake, and this Piper's kind of walking around, and there's this waitress who's dressed as a black cat and crosses her path, and Piper kind of moves her and is like, "No, don't cross my path like that." But then she goes to pick something up off the ground, and as Piper does that, she rips her skirt. And then she walks into the kitchen to start lighting, or to start this whole, what's it called? Sage, to start saging the room. And Doug walks up to her in the kitchen and asks if she's okay and says that she seems tense. And she says, "Well, it just seems that ever since I agreed to have dinner with Lucas, I've had a run of bad luck." She says how she broke a nail, how the shipment of clams was late, she had to fire a hostess, and she just ripped her skirt. And then Doug leaves, and she lights the sage up and starts kind of reading a spell. Almost tries to be secretive about it, like she's not in a kitchen with a million other chefs, and also like you should not be doing that in a kitchen like where you're serving food, but okay. And then as she's doing that, the fire alarm goes off from the smoke. And then everybody's looking around for, where the smoke's coming from. So she puts it out really quick in this boiling water and burns her hand on the water as she does it. She's like, "It is just not my day."
So I think here, we're really just picking up on more of Piper's superstition, kind of seeing the way that, kind of like you mentioned that Prue suggested earlier in the episode, that the reason all this bad luck is happening to her is probably because she believes in it so strongly.
She's putting all this negative energy into it. And ever since she agreed to dinner with Lucas, obviously she's been pretty like iffy about it, like still not sure if she should or shouldn't. Now all this bad stuff is happening.
Yeah. So then from there, we go back to the real estate office. Phoebe is sitting at the desk, and this man enters looking for Susan, which we find out is the blonde woman's name. I like how she's been in so many scenes, but we never knew her name until now. And Phoebe's kind of like, "Oh, she's not here, but I can tell her you came by. Like, what's your name? Whatever." He tells her, and we see that it's Susan's husband. He's like, I thought I'd surprise her and take her to dinner. Do you know where she is? And he was like, oh, yeah, she went out. And he's like, yeah, like, where do you know? And like, it's very awkward between them. And then she's kind of like, I can't do this. I'm sorry, Mr. Warner. I can't be the assistant your wife wants without compromising my beliefs. She says, she starts writing a note to quit and says that she's going to lock up before she leaves. He says, thank you for not lying to me about Susan's affair. And Phoebe's kind of like, oh, you knew. And he says, I've been trying to deny it for some time now, but I guess there comes a time when you have to face the truth. Phoebe tells him she's sorry. He's kind of like, don't quit on my account. And she's like, no, I'm not. And he leaves. She puts down the note she was writing. And just as she's about to leave, the phone starts ringing. There's like this older woman on the other end of the phone who asks where Susan is. She says she's at this house. Susan was supposed to show it to her. She flew in from LA just to see it. And Phoebe says, you know what? Like, I can show you the property. And she asks for the address. And that's how that scene ends.
So I feel like here, like we said before, we see Phoebe's morals shine through and how she would actually never be okay with that idea of loyalty is obviously important to her. This whole no cheating thing, and at least not, wanting to even be a part of it or cover up for her. I would feel pretty bad in this situation too. Like, I think if he had come up to me and I would have to lie to him, like, he seems like this sweet guy, like, just poor guy has no clue that his wife is cheating, I don't know.
And I feel like it's one of those things, like, because, he does know, but he's been in denial about it. And I feel like that's very realistic in, like, a situation like that. I feel like, especially, like, in a marriage where, like, you've built your whole life around this person. So it's harder to just be like, you know what, like, I know they're doing this thing. So he wants to, like, and you could see it the way he's kind of showing up for this impromptu dinner. Like, he wants to kind of save this relationship to make it work. And that's what kind of makes it sadder. And I feel like that's really what did it for Phoebe, right? This guy is so clearly trying
To make
in this
work.
marriage. And meanwhile, like, Susan is off on like some afternoon getaway with her boyfriend or whatever he is.
Yeah, no, it is pretty sad. I think I probably would have ended up saying something too.
Yeah.
I don't think I could handle the guilt from that. Okay, so now we move to the property that Phoebe is supposed to be showing this woman. And she arrives there and she walks up to the gate looking for Miss Joffe, who's the woman. And she goes into the backyard calling her name and looking around for her. And then the demon of fear appears behind her and uses the woman's voice at first to say, hello, dear, thanks so much for coming out. But then she turns around and sees that it's him. And he grabs her and she's like, I know how you kill. There are no elevators around here. And he says, elevators, that's what you think your greatest fear is? You mortals need to look deeper. Where the real truth lies, your greatest fear is losing a sister, and I get 2 for 1.
So I really like that line, especially following in the last scene where like Susan's husband said, there's a time where you have to face the truth. And then right in this next scene, Phoebe has to face the truth about what her greatest fear actually is. I thought that was a really like smart connection the writers made there.
And it's funny how all of their fears seem to be like, the first one, Tangela, was being buried alive in an earthquake. The second one was fire, and then Prue's water, which, I mean, she's got reason behind that because of their mother too. But like the way Phoebe's is so personal and deep, losing a sister, which like we've talked about before, the way that Phoebe's kind of the most emotional one, even though she's like that free wild child. We've always been able to see those little signs that she craves this relationship with her sisters, and she craves that connection from a mother or like a loved one that she never really got growing up.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that these other witches who we're kind of seeing as these solitary practitioners, their fears are very much normal mortal fears, right? Prue's is very much linked to their mother. Phoebe's is linked to her sisters. And it makes me wonder, had we seen Piper face the demon of fear, would her fear have actually been flying, or would it have been something connected to the family as well?
Yeah.
Because I feel like family, is such a theme in the show and such an important thing to these characters that we've been examining.
I wish that they could have included Piper in this whole demon of fear thing, I feel like she wasn't even involved at all, you know, like she didn't see any of it
Yeah, no,
going
she was the
down.
B plot this episode.
Yeah, she was the B plot this entire episode. But usually they at least like, you know, connect and discuss things together,
Mhm.
and we'll all like at least see him, but she never even, so I don't know. I wish they did include her because it would have been cool to see her fear as well, I think. But
Mhm.
overall, still amazing episode. Love it.
Yeah.
So we go to Buckland's, and Prue is on the phone with a witch, and she's warning her about, you know, avoiding the demon of fear. And then during this, another call comes through, and it's Phoebe saying that she's stuck at a house she was showing, and she asked Prue for a ride home. And Prue's like, yeah, like, I'll come get you right now. And then back at the house, we see that over the phone, it's actually the demon of fear calling using Phoebe's voice, and that Phoebe is tied up, shaking, and crying behind him.
So that's just pushing the plot forward.
Yeah.
I don't really have much to say there. So then from there, we go to a scene at Quake where Lucas and Piper are sitting down eating. So he took her on a date at the restaurant she works at.
Yeah.
Very romantic. You can see why he's so eligible.
I know. Most eligible bachelor.
They really hate paying for other sets in the show. Like, no one has ever eaten anywhere but Quake in their entire lives.
Nope.
So, you know, then Piper's saying how she's glad that he suggested this. And he says, you know, I almost didn't. He said that earlier in the day, he was kind of getting this sense that she was turned off to him and wouldn't want him to ask her out. He's kind of going through all these things about him. He's like, yeah, you know, like making fun of the article and talking about how like he wants a family, he wants to settle down, he loves his nieces so much, all these things. And to Piper, he's sounding like this really perfect guy. And she's like, there's no way. So she freezes him and she opens his wallet where she finds, you know, a picture and a note from his nieces. And like, she's like, wow, he really is too good to be true, and kind of puts the wallet back. And then she decides to be honest with him. She says, so your instinct about me this morning was right. I was sort of sending out these negative vibes. She tells him about the superstitions, that it's bad luck to meet someone on Friday the 13th, but then also that there was this ladybug thing. And you could tell by his face that he's just like, what the fuck is wrong with this girl?
Yeah.
So then he, you know, is like, you know what, this is way too much for me. My ex was like this with superstition too. And he's not going to let someone who lets omens determine their lives like be his partner. He just doesn't see that working out for him. So they have to end the date, basically.
Yeah. So poor Piper just lost the most eligible bachelor in San Francisco. I don't know why I have such a hard time
Not
saying
even
that
just in
word.
San Francisco, in the entire Bay Area.
Oh, the whole Bay Area. Jesus Christ. But it is kind of funny that he's such a good catch, and the only reason it didn't work out is because of Piper and these superstitions that she fed way too much into. So I don't know that this is very important scene. I feel like it's
Yeah.
just a filler kind of thing.
Yeah.
Piper's little side story.
We again just kind of see like, you know, that superstitiousness kind of like biting her in the ass.
Yeah.
I will say, I remember we brought it up in the episode where Leo left. So like 4 episodes back now, probably. Whether Piper and Leo were single now that he left town. And I guess the answer is very clearly yes, because Piper's been kind of having these other
Little
romantic
things.
interactions in these other episodes. Is Leo coming back?
I hope so.
Like, where is he at?
I
Come
know.
back, Leo.
When are you coming?
We don't care about this eligible bachelor.
We miss
This
you.
is not our ship.
So now we go back to the property, and Prue approaches, and she comes in through the back gate because in Phoebe's voice, the demon is still telling her to come back there. Then Prue is standing near the pool in the yard, and she turns around and she sees Phoebe tied up. Then the demon of fear comes up and just pretty much immediately pushes her into the pool. And now she's at the bottom of the pool, and the demon says, "That's right, feed me your fear." At the bottom of the pool, she can't really get herself back up right now. And this light appears around Prue, and it starts kind of, and we see this figure who starts kind of saying her name. And then there's this woman in a white dress who appears and tells her that she needs to face her fears and trust in the greatest of all powers, love. And she said, "Save yourself, save your sister." And Prue obviously can see that that's their mother. And she puts out her hand, and Prue reaches out and grabs it. And her mom kind of pulls her up to the surface. and Prue comes above the water and then, is back to reality and swims to the edge, and she looks at the demon and says it's over. And she uses her power to throw him to the ground, climbs out. He looks at her kind of confused because no one's ever beaten him with his fear before. And she says, I'm not afraid anymore. And this was enough for him to just completely fall apart because he starts screaming, no! And then just kind of goes poof into red fire and smoke, whatever. And then she goes over to Phoebe, whose ropes just kind of disappeared when the demon died. And they hug each other, and she's like, I was so scared. And Prue's like, I know, but you're safe now. And then Phoebe's like, well, I don't know what would happen if I ever lost you. I love you. And then Prue says, I love you, back for the first time ever. And they're both hugging and smiling and, laughing, all happy.
Yeah. So before we get into the emotional aspects of this scene, I have a couple technical things I want to talk about a little bit. It must have been really hard to shoot this for Shannon Darty because it's really hard to stay at the bottom of water like that. If you try to stay at the bottom of a pool, it's really hard.
Yeah.
So props to her for being able to film that and kind of make it seem semi-realistic.
I know. How did they have her staying all the way at the ground? And she was literally swimming around too, pretending like she was trying to swim back up. And I feel like I would have such a hard time actually staying on the bottom. That cannot be easy at all.
Yeah. Special effects weren't horrible here. I kind of liked the Demon of Fear's death. It wasn't too campy. It had an okay feel to it. Right. So I appreciated that. And of course, everything with their mother, it's very sweet. It's very sentimental, which I think is one of the vibes of this episode. But yeah, I liked that. I like that the greatest of all powers is love, which again connects us to that Prue can't say I love you thing.
Yeah.
That's been a theme of the episode. And of course, that I love you moment is a very cute moment between the two of them.
I mean, the first time she ever said I love you to Phoebe, that's beautiful. And it's all because her mom, her mom passing away, drowning through water, started her fear of the ocean. I love how it all connects, started her fear of water and this whole idea of her not being able to say I love you. And then here her mom comes back, she has that dream that her mom is pulling her and taking her somewhere. And then here we have her mom pulling her and taking her to the surface and telling her, love, you need to conquer your fear, which is water, and that love is the way to do it. And that she needs to open her heart to her sisters and everyone around her and can't just be closed off because of what happened to her mother,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then we go to the manor where Piper is sitting by the fireplace and she's throwing all her little charms and trinkets from the beginning of the episode into it. I know I said it when we were watching it, but why are people in shows always throwing things that don't burn just into the fire? You're just gonna have to clean that up later. It's not gonna burn. It's metal. But whatever. Phoebe and Prue come in and they're what's going on? And she's like, I just lost probably the greatest catch in San Francisco. He doesn't like women who rely on superstitions to make decisions. And I'm not so sure she's wrong. So, Piper did learn this little lesson here. And then Phoebe goes on to tell her that Prue vanquished the demon of fear, or at least, sent him back to wherever he came from for the next 1,300 years. They tell her what happened in the pool. And Prue says that, it was their mom who helped her to get out. And she knows it sounds crazy. Piper says that doesn't sound crazy. I wish I could have seen her. And Phoebe's like, me too. And then Piper goes over to hug Prue. And Prue says, I love you to Piper. And Piper's kind of like, what did you just say?
Yeah.
You've never said that to me before. And, they're all smiling. And she kind of looks at Phoebe a little bit. And then Prue explains to her that, she said it to mom. She didn't want to lose anyone else. And Piper's like, well, we're not going anywhere. And then Prue decides that she's going to go up to bed, says goodnight to them. And then once Prue's gone, Piper asks Phoebe what happened to Prue in the pool. And Phoebe says, I don't know, but whatever it was, it must have been incredible.
I think the ending there was super sentimental, cute, but so corny. So much. It's just so unrealistic. What happened to her in there? I don't know, but it must have been amazing. I was like, all right, guys. We get it. But generally this is a really cute part, and also it's pretty much them just going over the same thing again, but with Piper we obviously could have assumed the reason she wasn't saying I love you. The last thing she said to their mother was that, and then she lost her, you know. You don't want to, like, it's kind of like that idea of even in relationships when you don't want to say I love you or like admit how you actually feel because you're scared that in the end it's going to come back and bite you in the ass because people are going to leave or something. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So obviously that was a big thing for Prue too. So it almost feels like to me though that, I mean, I guess I get it, but that could have been Prue's greatest fear. Like, it kind of would make a lot of sense for her greatest fear to be losing someone else too, seeing as how much it all affected her. But then again, she did watch her mother drown, so
Yeah.
So I'm sure that was more traumatizing in her head.
And I feel like that's kind of a fear for all of them, right? Like, I don't think it's just Phoebe's fear.
Yeah, no, of course.
But I think he was able to play up that really strong physical fear for Prue to kind of affect both Prue and Phoebe. Yeah. And that's kind of why the Demon of Fear went that way with it.
That route, yeah, exactly. Now we are back in the attic, and the clock is ticking, and Prue is sitting upstairs with the Book of Shadows in her lap, and she's on the Demon of Fear page, and at the bottom we see, you know, it kind of sparkles and starts spelling something out like her mom is writing more. And then we see the words, "Thanks for letting them into your heart," appear and are kind of like spoken over the audio. And then Prue kind of touches the page and she's like, "I miss you, Mom." And that's how the episode ends.
Yeah. So again, just like the last scene, it's just kind of this cute little sentimental ending that happens. I don't really have too much to say as far as that scene. Do you have anything you want to say?
Not really. I feel like the last 3 scenes are all pretty much the same, giving us all the same idea throughout the episode. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I will say this is one of my favorite episodes. I remember when we did our intro episode, I did name this as one of my top 10 episodes. I love this episode. I love this demon. Yeah. I love the moments with the sisters. And, you know, kind of looking back, I was like, will the episodes I named as my favorites, will I still like them when we rewatch them? And I definitely still really love this episode.
Yeah, because I know, you know, with the whole, the last episode, the Wendigo episode, I never named it as one of my favorites because it's, you know, it's not one of my favorites, my top 10, but I do really, really love that episode. I always have. And then watching it again, I realized, like, you know, when we looked at it from an analytical aspect and like behind it, like we really did crap on it a lot more than I expected. So I wonder if that's going to happen with future episodes that I, you know, also consider one of my favorites. So I'm excited to see about that.
Me too. But yeah, no, this is a really good episode. I liked our conversation. I liked everything that happened. I don't have anything negative to say at this point.
No, me neither. I think this was just all around a pretty good episode.
Yeah. Couple moments that, you know, are a tad too cheesy, but overall really good episode.
They always do that. What else is new?
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. If you want to reach out to us or follow us on social media, we're on Instagram and TikTok at rewitched_pod. You can also send us an email to rewitched.pod@gmail.com. And join us back next time for season 1, episode 14, Secrets and Guys.